They both weighed the same, and it got me thinking, like, how do you measure happiness? So for me,
this is a great way to introduce this topic. So if we look back at the structure that you use, how can you become a great TEDx speaker? Well, in this video as a speaker's coach, I'm breaking down and analyze the TEDx of Jesse Itzler about the happiness meter, which I think is a great TEDx. In the next 30 minutes, I will show you what works, what doesn't work, and how you can use it to craft your own story. Have a lot of fun watching! All right, I was reading Living with a Seal from Jesse Itzler, and it's written such in descriptive language. The storytelling is so spot on that I was curious if this guy also speaks a lot. And then I found this TEDx that he did, the happiness meter. And today with you, I will do a complete review of what I think of his TEDx, watching it together with you. So if you're ready, take a comfortable seat. I will make myself some smaller, and let's watch this TEDx.
thank you. I hate introductions. I got shell-shocked at an introduction in 1991, and I'm still not over it. Right after college, I was signed to a record label called Delicious Vinyl.
Okay, let's stop here. We always open with a hook. We open with something. The first 7 seconds, people unconsciously decide if they're going to listen to us, yes or no. And what he's doing right here is absolutely brilliant. He starts with, I don't like introductions, and he immediately dives into a story, which basically is his hook. So he's finishing his own way of thinking, which is, I don't like introductions, but that's actually the use of an introduction. So he dives into story immediately. I think that's brilliant.
And Delicious Vinyl had two huge acts at the time. One was a guy named Tone Loc, who had a song called Wild Thing, you're nodding, yes, and Funky Cold Medina. And there was another artist on the label named Young MC who won a Grammy for his song called Bust a Move. And I was the next artist signed to Delicious Vinyl. And I got a call one day from the owner of the record company who said that they're having this huge concert in Atlanta, Georgia, where I live, at the Georgia Dome, and they're busing in 36,000 inner city kids from all over the state of Georgia for this concert that they were coining the Increase the Peace concert. So they were going to have black artists and white artists come together in this community bonding concert. Well, the day before the concert, I think Vanilla Ice canceled, and they needed a white rapper. And they volunteered me to be the white act at the event. So I get a plane ticket, and I fly down to Atlanta, and when I get there, immediately I recognize, like, the place is unruly, like really unruly. There's fist fights going on in the stands, and they're putting the house lights on to control the crowd, and there's police everywhere, and the kids are booing every single act that came on stage. They're booing them right off the stage. So
all right, so Jesse is diving into a story. And what you see when he's talking about the story, in the first minute, he introduces already the personas who are there, right? He puts a name. I forgot the name. It doesn't ring a bell for me. But what he also does incredibly well is he paints the picture inside of your brain. The kids are booing. It's something you can hear. The lights are there. It's a black person and a white person. Like, he's stating the framework. He is painting a picture inside of your brain. And what I want you to focus on as well is the pace that he is talking. He's talking quite slowly. And I can imagine, like, this guy is so enthusiastic all the time. I mean, this book, you feel the enthusiasm inside of his words. But the truth is, people don't know this story yet, and he has living his story. So it's super easy to talk so rapidly, but sometimes it's really good to be aware of your pace. Like, I am much more aware of it now. I started, I think, quite fast out of enthusiasm. Now I want to control it a bit more. So amazing beginning. Let's continue.
The first guy up, I think, was LL Cool J in his prime. They boo him right off the stage. I'm sitting over here in the green room, about to go on next to sing my song called Shake It Like a White Girl. So I called my mother, like 21 years old. I called my mother. I said, Mom, I got a really big problem, man. They're booing the best artist off the stage. Like, they're booing him off the stage. She said, sweetie, just be yourself. They're going to love you. Doesn't work like that. So the MC gets up. He's like, ladies and gentlemen, all the way from California, give it up for my main man, Jesse James, which was my stage name. Don't Google it.
Well, first of all, he already had two super funny jokes, and he also takes a pause for people to laugh. Does it mean you have to be funny if you're a great public speaker? No. And that's a point that I want to make right now, because he's like calling, his mom is calling, and he has a different voice. He creates this character who's introducing him on stage, and he has a different voice. Is that very much Jesse? Well, I don't know this guy personal, but I do feel it's really authentic for him. It would be something that he does not mean you have to do it. I think why this talk in 2 minutes 24 is already actually really, really awesome is because he is really himself on stage. He is walking a bit, he's pointing, he just touched his bottle of water. Can it be distracting? Well, factually, maybe yes. Is it working in this talk? Yes, I do think it's working because it's really, really authentic. Let's continue.
The crowd is silent. I'm about to come on stage, and I'm looking at the audience, and the kids are pissed off. I'm holding the mic like I'm there. The kids are pissed off. That's how real this is to me. The kids are pissed off that I'm coming on stage. And I had some t-shirts that the record company gave me, like promotional t-shirts. So I bring them on stage. I'm like, does this section over here want some free t-shirts? The kids go crazy. I throw them out. You guys over here, you want some t-shirts? They go nuts. I throw them out. Middle section, you want some t-shirts? I throw them out. I said, thank you guys very much. Salt and Pepper's up next. And I got the hell out of there. Still not over that introduction years later. I got one of the best compliments I ever got in my life last week from a friend of mine. He came over to me, he said, Jess, you're one of the happiest people I ever met.
This is very interesting because he's beginning his talk with, I don't like introductions. Then he's backing that up with the story. And then he concludes, I'm still not over that introduction. So somehow this introduction is very important to him. And now we're shifting in a second phase, in a second story, right? He's talking about a compliment that he got. Right now, I have a hard time figuring out why he told this story before, like this introduction, why it's so important. But maybe it will make sense throughout the talk. And that is also the power of storytelling. I'm completely with him. I'm like, okay, tell me more about this big compliment. I don't understand it yet, but maybe it will make sense. And I'm all ears. Let's listen.
And I was like, man, thank you so much. That means so much to me. Thank you so much. And then when he walked away, I'm like, how in the world does he know how happy I am? And how do you even measure your own personal happiness? Like, what if there was a way that we could measure at any given moment, take inventory on how happy each of us individually actually were? And it's brought me back to my childhood. My first job, believe it or not, was as a break dancer. I grew up in New York in the early 1980s when breakdancing was emerging on the scene. And I thought to myself one day, like, there's no way the kids in Washington, D.C. could possibly be as good as the breakdancers from New York. Like, we.
All right, another thing. What he's doing is he had his introduction, he had his hook, and he's now diving into his topic, which is, apparently, according to the title, the happiness meter. He introduces the subject by a compliment by a friend. It's a scope forward, and then he's like, okay, it brings me back to my childhood. So we go back. So it's a very good tight structure where I'm, as a listener, am able to follow, okay, it is about happiness. We are talking about happiness now, and we're starting in the beginning of his career.
Invented this stuff. So I had this idea, like, why don't I go to D.C. and try to make money in Washington, D.C.? Like, the competition won't be as fierce. So I called up my friend Myron, who's part of my two-man crew, and I convinced my sister, who just got her driver's license, to drive us down to Washington, D.C. So we get in the car, and we start driving the 4 hours down to Washington, D.C., and we show up in Georgetown, and we find a bank with a big parking lot. and I take out my boom box. I have my boom box, and I put my boom box down in the corner of the parking lot. I tilt my hat to the side, and I push play on the boom box, and the music starts playing, and I start going through my thing, and I pass it over to Myron, and he spins on his back, flips over, spins on his head, then he passes it over to me, and I start breakdancing, and a crowd comes. This big crowd forms. Now we have their attention, like this is working. And I take off my hat, and I go around to the crowd, and I start collecting all the money from people there, and at the end of the day, we collect $213. And I give my sister the money that she invested to drive us down, the gas money. And we split up money for food. And at the end of the day, we have $82, $41 each. And Myron starts counting the money. He's counting the money, puts it in his pocket, then he takes it back out. He starts recounting the money, and he stuffs it into his pocket. We're 15 years old, and with his huge eyes lit up, he looks at me, and he takes a running bear hug, and he squeezes me, and he goes, "Jess, we're so damn rich!" Fast forward 20 years. I started a private jet company called Marquis Jet. And I'm looking for my very first customer ever. I need my first sale, and I'm struggling. I don't know anyone that's rich that can afford time on an airplane. So I heard about the only way that I could really find qualified leads, like I didn't have a sophisticated way to bring in leads at the time, I had to go to where people that could afford to buy time on a plane were. And I heard about a conference in Monterey, California called TED. And I got on an airplane from New York, it was to California, rented a car, drove 5 hours to Monterey, California, and I show up at the TED conference. And when I get there, I immediately realized, like, nobody told me that you need a credential to get into the TED conference. It's like Fort Knox there. Like, I can't get anywhere near the conference. So I go to the local coffee shop right next to where the conference was. And as I'm sitting there trying to map out my strategy, like how am I going to get someone's attention to try to sell them into our program, I realized that about every hour, people are coming in with credentials and they're buying lattes and muffins. Lattes and muffins. So I go back to my hotel, and the next day at 5 a.m., I'm the first one at the coffee shop. And as soon as they open, I buy every single muffin that they have. I take them out of all their inventory. I now control all the muffin inventory in Monterey, California.
Okay, I didn't want to interrupt because I think it's too good to watch in one go. But what he basically does is he first gets a scene of his life, a story, a moment in time that he can tell to convey a point. And in this stage, where I think he's going to is that he had $40 or 82, and it made him incredibly happy. Now he's to a different stage of his life, a different scene of his life, where he again wants to make a point about money and happiness. At least that's where I think it's going towards. But what's interesting here to learn from is that every time he tells a scene of his life to utilize a point. He could have had like graphs and he could have backed it up with data already and poured you in with a lot of facts. But the truth is, our brain is wired to remember stories. And he is describing them in such elaborate detail that we can paint the picture inside of our brain, which is exactly what we want as public speakers, to paint the picture inside the brain of our listeners. He is doing that with details, like his eyes were this big, or they were all having credentials, or it was like a 5-hour drive. Like he's taking us on his journey. So let's continue this journey.
I put him in my bag, and I keep one muffin on my table. I start reading the newspaper. Sure enough, at the first break of the TED conference, people with credentials start invading the coffee shop. And sure enough, one of the first customers comes in, and he says, I like a latte and a muffin. I said, oh, you can have the latte, but I'm sorry, we're all out of muffins. He's like, oh. And as he's walking out, I said, I'm sorry, sir. I overheard you having a conversation, and it just so happens I have an extra muffin. I'm not going to have it. He says, really? I said, now I'm staring right at his credential. I'm like, oh, yeah, no, really? He said, oh, that's so nice. He said, well, what do you do? I said, oh, well, I'm here for the conference, and I have a company called marquee jet. We sell time on private jets. He said, no way. I'm actually looking into programs like that. I'm interested in that. And he said, do you mind if I join you and have a muffin? And I'm looking at this guy, and in my head I'm saying, absolutely, Mr. Qualified. Like, of course you can. And I'm like, yeah, sure. So we start to have a muffin, and we're enjoying our time. I'm explaining the program, and he becomes the first sale that I ever have at a company that goes on to do $5 billion in cumulative sales. And we sell that company one day to Warren Buffett's NetJets. But when we sold the company, I was no more happy than the 15-year-old kid that made $41 and had $41 in his pocket. And it made me think, like, it weighed the same. They both weighed the same, and it got me thinking, like, how do you measure happiness? So for me,
this is a great way to introduce this topic. So if we look back at the structure that he used an introduction that he does not like introductions, which maybe was already his point. I'm not sure if we go back to it. But he was just telling a story a bit about himself. When he dived into the topic, he was stating something, a compliment that he got from a friend, and he dived back into this professional career all the way in the beginning. And now he's going towards his topic, which is money related to happiness. And apparently he had little money, he had a lot of money. But how does it relate to happiness? And it's a great way to use these specific stories to paint that picture. Again, he could have used so much data, but he used his personal life, personal moments, personal scenes, specific moments in his life to make this point, which is, again, the most effective way of communication. I already told that we want to paint the picture, and it's actually brain science. It's not fluff. Because if we talk about only facts, it's only one part of our brain that lights up. But if we talk about what we see, what we hear, what we felt, like what Jesse is doing amazingly, then 7 parts of our brain light up. And can you imagine that if 7 parts of your brain light up when you hear information, and it's also stored there, that it will, stay a bit longer inside of your brain, inside of your memory, and you can recall it way later on because it was painting a picture. Let's continue.
For me, obviously, it wasn't money, but how do you measure happiness? And what if there was a simple way that you could identify at any given time really how happy you are? Take real inventory in your life and identify how happy you are, but more importantly, identify what it is in your life that makes you unhappy so you can correct it. So I came up with a very simple metrics, and we're all going to do this. It's going to be a group experiment. It's called the happiness meter. It's super effective, and the results are unbelievable. They're astounding. So here's how it works. I want everybody here, everyone's going to do it, to think about all the different buckets of your life. Your wealth, your health, your relationships, your kids, where you live, the job that you have, your parents are getting elderly, we're getting older, everything. And put it in a giant blender, okay? And on a scale of 1 to 10, with a 10 being the Dalai Lama of happiness, and a 1 being someone that's rock bottom.
Okay, I want to emphasize this again, because he could have said, take all the things in your bucket and rate it on a scale of 1 to 10. No, he's painting the picture. What does he say? He says, put it all in a blender. We can see that in front of us. We see those buckets going around. And then he says, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the Dalai Lama, which creates a picture inside of our brain. And then also he emphasizes with his body movements, which is even more vivid. Amazing.
Think about your number. I'll give you guys a second. Really, honestly, really take inventory and really think about it. We have any volunteers want to share their number? We don't have to. You're just scratching? It's like a Bud Light commercial. Anybody? We'll do it this way. Just by a show of hands. Everybody that's a 7 or less, put your hand up. Quite a few people, right? Okay, put your hands down. Well, here's what happens.
I want to say something about this moment of the Buzz Lightyear. What can happen is if you ask an open question that no one answers. It's very great to already be aware of the scenarios that you will run through if that happens, when that happens, and what could even happen. So the situation is like this. Most of the time when you ask a question, people are a bit awkward and they don't answer immediately. So jokes like this, although again, I do think this person is really authentic and real, and I really like that, you can already think about how you want to answer because you already pre-visualized this moment inside of your brain. At the same time, when you're doing an amazing talk, you're doing it more and more times, and you can experiment with different parts of your talk. So if he asks these questions more often inside of or in front of big audiences, he will first recognize that apparently no one answers immediately. Okay, noted. So what are you going to do? Well, you will have a backup plan. For example, okay, let's do it like this. Raise your hand. Maybe one time one person scratched and he was a bit awkward because he wasn't improvising immediately, maybe. And he learned, okay, this is a reaction that I can give. Again, when you do this more and more often, you can actually be yourself on stage, or you can always be yourself on stage. But what I more mean is comfortably and authentically improvise, because you're so relaxed and you're trusting so much on your content that you have headspace to think about these moments of improvisation. But it's very interesting to already think ahead of the situations that can happen if you ask a question and how you will react accordingly. All right, let's continue.
A lot of people put their hands up. 7's a common number. And for most people, 7's a great number. If my son comes home from school with a 70 on his test, that's a C- in the most important bucket of your life. But the way the test works is, what's amazing about this test and why it's so efficient, is as soon as we do this experiment, your brain goes to a 10. Immediately it goes to a 10, right? Everyone went to a 10. And the 2 or 3 things that are impacting your life negatively pop into your head. Like, oh, my relationship is terrible. Oh, I'm running out of money. Whatever it is pops into your head. So whatever it was that popped into your head right away, those are the 2, 3 things that you have to work on. And here's why it's so important. The average American, on average, lives to be about 78 years old. I'm not saying anyone here is average. I hope I'm not average. That's 28,470 days. Okay, I'm 49 years old. That means if I'm average, I have 29 years left of life. If I'm a 7 and I'm walking around life living as a C-,
what he's doing here great is that he used a lot of storytelling, but now he also uses facts to back it up. And that is like the awesome relationships with storytelling and factual information. If you're only using storytelling and only telling stories, then around 1/3 of your audience will be like, okay, I got your story, I am inspired, but like what is there to back up? It sounds a bit fluff. If you're only using facts, then probably 30% of your audience is satisfied, won't remember it for a long time because it's only stored in one place of our brain, and we're losing the rest. And that's just based on the learning preference of people. So what he's doing here great is that he is tying it together. Like he brought you on the journey. Now he's backing it up with facts. So let's see what he does next.
In the most important bucket of my life, happiness, that is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. I have a quick drink here. I'm a little like the Georgia sun. That's unacceptable. We have a way to measure so many of the different buckets of our life. For example, we get on a scale to measure our weight. We have an IQ test to measure how intelligent we are. We have financial statements and bank accounts and tax brackets to measure our wealth. But we don't invest any time really looking at our happiness. We can get on a scale every single day and say, oh man, and be upset. We gained a pound. We lost a pound. But we really don't take inventory on our happiness. So this little take-it-home test which takes 30 seconds to do. Forget going to the doctor and reading all this little test really helped me identify what it is I have to work on in my life. And of course, I'm investing the time to do it. So if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Thank you, guys.
Okay, I love this. I love this. This is his end. How are you gonna wrap it up? Well, he's really giving a call to action, right? Because I always think that the best speeches are not inspirational, because inspiration is just something in the air where you're like, oh, this is interesting. But something that's interesting does not move the needle when you don't take any action upon it. So what he says is he got a simple test that we did all together and experienced what the value could be. He explained how it's working for him. Well, he's a successful person, so it shows credibility. And now he's saying, use this test to measure it frequently in your life to become more happy. And then to wrap it up, he wants an applause. So he's just saying, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. I think that's absolutely brilliant. Jesse is an amazing storyteller. Like, let's be frank, I think he told 4 or 5 and some in the middle. He used anecdotes, like he said, if my son comes home from school with a 70 on his test, he's using all these analogies, all these moments, all these specific situations to paint the picture inside of our brain to make his point. The only thing that I personally still don't completely get was his introduction. Apparently he thought it was super important to say he doesn't like introductions and tell a whole story about it. I think he used like one or 2 minutes for that. It could have been to be a bit vulnerable, or to just say what it is, to tell something about himself, because he was a rapper before and maybe it made sense to know that he's a rapper, to dive into the second story, which was the story where he earned his first money, is $42 or $41. That could be, but in total, I mean, this guy is just an amazing storyteller, and that's what I want to wrap up with. Does that mean that you have to do this too, exactly the way that Jesse did it? No. What's really, really awesome about this talk is that I feel, as a listener, without knowing this person personally, that he is just being himself. If he is thirsty, he gets a bit of a drink. If he wants to do another voice, then he does it. If he wants to walk around, make big hand gestures, raise his voice because it's just him, that is what works. The authentic version of storytelling, the real stories, but also told from you as a person. So the most important thing that I learned from this, and that I hope you take with you as well, is that it's very important to have a clear framework, which he did. He started with a hook. He painted the picture. He set the scene. He had the problem. He had the solution. He had a clear call to action. He used storytelling. He used anecdotes, metaphors to paint the picture inside of the brain of the audience. And he was being, in my opinion, his real, raw, authentic self. So this was it. I hope you learned something from the talk itself, and you're blending your different buckets in life and rate yourself and be aware of the parts that you want to improve, and that you just improved your public speaking skills by this breakdown of this TEDx. All right. Alright, I hope you enjoyed this TEDx as much as I did, and that you learned something in the process. In the case of learning, I would love to know what was your biggest aha moment, and please put it down in the comments. And if you have any recommendations of what I should analyze next, then put it in the comments as well, and I will make a breakdown video for that too. For the matter, like this video and subscribe to the channel to help others see it and to be aware what the next one will be, because it will be really cool content for you to become a next level public speaker. Alright, see you in the next one.